My name is Chris Henry. I'm an associate professor and water management engineer with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture, located here at the Rice Research and Extension Center. What I'm going to talk about today is irrigation water management for rice farmers, and also then what we've been doing to help improve the furrow irrigated rice production system. First, I want to talk about the irrigation contest, Most Crop Per Drop. This is an extension program where farmers take a 30-acre field and manage irrigation the best they can to get the highest yield. So we call it the most crop per drop because we measure the total amount of water, both irrigation and rain, versus their yield. We take a 3-acre or small check plot in every field. We measure and seal the meters so that we know how much water goes on the field, and then we award a first, second, third place to the winners. This year we have 40 people in the irrigation contest, 14 people are new. Last year the person that won it was Cody Fincher. He used a Cascade flooded rice field, which is not what I would recommend someone entering the irrigation contest, but he did a very good job and won with management, really managed the water in the field. And that's really the idea behind the irrigation contest. It gives us an opportunity to really look at how we manage water on a field and get a lot of information about how we're doing with irrigation on that field. We give every person who enters gets a report card, so they get to see how they compared to everybody. So you get to see what your water use efficiency is, what your yield was relative to everyone else. And now that we have a lot of repeat people in the contest, they're getting to see historically how they're doing, if they're improving with their irrigation water management. Next, I'd like to mention our mobile apps that are available to farmers. We have the Rice Irrigation app to help design multiple inlet rice irrigation. We're going to release a new version of that in 2022. And also our Arkansas Watermark Calculator tool, where you can use that to help interpret watermark sensors. We've been adding some information into that app about how to manage furrow irrigated rice. So you put in your soil moisture readings, your soil type, plant growth stage, effective rooting depth, and it tells you then how far away you are from irrigating. Then lastly, here behind me, we have my main research program where we look at furrow irrigated rice, how we can improve that. This has been about a 7-year project. So it's all no-till. It's been no-till for 5 years. We try to keep the beds intact, continuous rice, usually hybrid. This particular hybrid here is 7321 Rice Tech full page rice. And then what we try to do is interlace things that we can do to try to improve the furrow irrigated rice production system. We developed this novel tailwater recovery system, or a pitless recovery system, so there's no tailwater pit. We basically use this pump that's behind me to collect the tailwater that comes off the field and immediately return it back to the top end of the field. So we essentially recirculate water around the field, around and around. And it's allowed us to use, to really reduce our water consumption. We're over 90% efficient generally, and last year we grew 200 plus bushel rice on 12 inches of water using this system. One of the problems with furrow irrigated rice is that we irrigate it much more frequently. And as a result, we have a lot more issues with the beds eroding near the polypipe. And so we have tried some different things, ideas to try to mitigate this crossing over or short-circuiting of the furrows. Last year we tried landscape fabric. That actually worked pretty well, or it's actually plastic mulch is what it's really called. And it just wasn't long enough, and sometimes the water would push past it and then start to erode and cut underneath it. This year we tried a different product. It's a Tyvek product we made and developed with a drip fitting to try to push water down in the furrow and kind of get past this area where it'll often erode. So we've been working on a variety of different things to try to make the whole production system work better and more effective. One of the important questions we're trying to answer is really how often do you need to irrigate furrow irrigated rice, and how can we improve that? So we've set up an experiment where we've looked at 0, 3, 7 to 10 days, and this year we've expanded it to 0, 3, 5, 7, 10, and 14 days. And within that, what we try to do is we measure the soil moisture, we time the irrigations, and then we measure the yield. And that allows us to build a picture of how can we, at what point in the soil water balance do we need to decide to irrigate without yield penalty. So that's what we've done out here. And then we have the 0 day, so we get this comparison between all of the spectrum of when we might irrigate fertigated rice. And that provides us information we can use for our mobile app development, which is how to schedule irrigation with watermarks. We're at the top of the field now, and on my left or your right is the 0-day irrigation, where this is the plot where water has been going down the furrows continuously the last 2 months. The rice is very tall, filled out well. And then here's on the right is the 14-day irrigation cycle. The soil has gotten a lot drier over here. The rice isn't as tall, hasn't flushed out quite as much, but this is what it looks like. 14-day rice, only irrigated twice all summer, and irrigated every day. So what we've learned so far is that we can probably go to about a 40% allowable depletion with about a 14 to 24 inch rooting depth. We put watermarks. We recommend putting watermarks at 4, 6, 8, 12, and 24 inch depths. And that gives us a pretty good assessment of the soil water balance. And everything we found in the fields over the years has supported that recommendation that we're just now releasing. So if you use the mobile app, you can use that information then to help decide how often to irrigate. One thing that I've learned is that row rice is incredibly resilient to different practices. So we haven't seen a huge difference in the 0 to 10 day. It's a very small numerical difference, but it's not significant. It's what we saw last year. So the next thing we've looked at also is nitrogen management. How can we fertilize, and what's the interaction between irrigation and nitrogen? So this year we've added a nitrogen study on top of our irrigation study to try to answer the question of, if we wait to irrigate later, will we need some more nitrogen to make up because we might lose it through denitrification? So that's another study we have out in this field that we're looking at. We've also looked at ESN, environmentally safe nitrogen, which is really interesting with row rice because it would allow us to put all our fertilizer on when we put our potash and phosphate. So we essentially are done with one pass fertilizer application. And can that fertilizer sustain us through the entire growing season with row rice? And so we've looked at that as well, and then how that relates to how often we irrigate. Then lastly, we really wanted to step out and see if we could fertigate row rice. It's not a practice. We do it in some other crops and other production systems, but it's a novel way of supplementing and adding nitrogen with the irrigation water. So what we do is when it's time to irrigate, usually after pre-flood time period, we start adding nitrogen, actually inject nitrogen into the water stream as we're irrigating. Last year we did it with UAN, or 32% fertilizer. We inject it basically at 3 different events, about 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre per irrigation. We do that 3 times. And what you end up doing is you end up doing it after, sometime around green ring as you do those 3 irrigation events. And that worked really well last year. This year, what we tried to do was use liquefied urea, which is a little more challenging, but it's a little less expensive. So what you do there is you take urea, you put it in water. It's an endothermic reaction. It actually chills the water. So you need really hot water to do this. Liquefy it, and we got to about 40% nitrogen in that solution. And we did the same thing, only this year we tried to put it on a little sooner, tried to get it all on before green ring. And that didn't work quite as well as I thought. I didn't think it worked quite as well as waiting till a little bit later. One challenge that we had this year was that we had a really heavy rainstorm right after we laid the pipe, and it really washed our beds out. And so one of the lessons we've learned this year is you've got to have really good beds. Our beds had kind of gotten washed out or packed down from last year being 5 years old. We just use a furrow runner to clean them out, and some of them had really started to close up. And so early in the season we had a hard time getting water across the field, but as the rice grows and gets bigger, it actually self-corrects some, especially with the no-till soil. And so now, if we'd had fertilizer, it did just fine. If we couldn't get fertilizer to certain parts of the field, the rice isn't as well developed. So that's one thing that we've learned and encourage people to be mindful of if you try to use this kind of production system. So one of the other things that we tried to do was, while we fertigated, we would take tissue samples, mainly nitrogen, but also looking at our micronutrients. And we did that along the top, middle, bottom. And then what we would do as we irrigated every time, we would look at the tissue samples to see if we're deficient in nutrients, and then we added that in into the fertilizer solution and injected it as we irrigated. And we found we were short of several micronutrients, and so we added that in last year. This year we didn't do that, and I kind of regret not doing that, but we just ran out of time. Another thing that we tried to do this year was to irrigate a conventional to see how we could improve the conventional row rice system. We've been mostly using hybrids. So last year we started using Aroma 17 as a surrogate for conventionals to see if we could grow it in a fertigated system. Aroma 17 is an aromatic rice. It's never been grown to our knowledge in the fertigated rice production system. So we did that last year. So we milled it up and packaged it. Feel free to come by the station and pick up a bag. I'd like to thank the Arkansas Rice Research and Promotion Board and the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture and all the rice farmers and all the companies that support our work, as well as my crew, especially Russ Parker, who runs and manages the irrigation contest, and Travis Clark for taking care of the plots out here on the station. And thanks for joining us today.